University and Colleges initiative. But I will put it into a Mankato perspective because I think that's more important to people because that's what we're here day to day about and how we are affected by this mandate from the system. And the good thing about it, and I think our data will show it as we go forward, is that we actually the system started its journey last year on equity. We started our journey about in 2017, where we began as a division and then as a university to look at the data points and see where many of our students were not being successful at the institution and were leaving, and all the different data points that showed us what we needed to do different as an institution. The system Equity 2030 has 3 pillars to it. Equity 2030 being the overarching. First one being student success. Next one being employee success. And this third one being, which is the one I have not yet ever been able to find a overarching heading for it. But the bottom line is that the system and the university has lots of contracts with external people who build stuff for us, people that come to campus to speak, people we buy paper from, people we buy products from, people we buy equipment from. So the third leg is that those dollars that the system, which is a multi-billion-dollar operation, and the university, which is a $160 million operation, that people who are people of color organizations and companies run and owned by people of color, by women and veterans, have an equitable chance to get those dollars. And that's one actually proven to be a little challenging for the system because they don't seem to know what companies fall in that category. They don't seem to know companies that are owned by women or run by people of color or veterans. So that is something they are working on to be able to distinguish those companies so that we can figure out how we can do a better job of outreaching them and helping them navigate sometime Byzantine bidding process for the system and the university. So again, those are the 3 things that by 2030, that's what the 2030 means, by 2030, so that's 9 years from now, that we will have no gaps in those 3 areas on student success. Historically, the university on the student side has had about a 10 to 11% gap of student success between majority students and domestic students of color. And that's not unusual nationwide. So by 2030, we will have no gaps of that sort anymore. The other goal of student success is that our student body, this is what former President Davenport and current President Inch have reaffirmed, that our student body should minimally be reflective of the state demographics for domestic people, which is 20%. So our goal as an institution is that minimally, our student population should be 20%. That does not include international. That is strictly domestic students of color. For your FYI, international students are not factored into Equity 2030. They sit outside of those data points that we look at. So again, 20%. Pre-pandemic, and that's an important reality. Remember, we started in 1917 with 2017, which was pre-pandemic. Last time we checked, and we'll do the number again 30 days after the start, so the end of September, we were up to about 19% of our student body being domestic people of color. And I'll give you a point of reference. When I got here 31 years ago, we were about 3%. And if you factor in international, but they're not factored in, but they're part of reality of the diversity of our student body, they're about 9%. So at that point, we were, about 27% of our student body would be considered diverse. Both presidents, again, Davenport initially, and then Inch now, the goal that we set for employees is that they should be reflective of the student body. So again, the goal there is that students, employees of color should be about 20% of our workforce. And those are minimums. So it doesn't mean we can't get to 25, but we should get to 20. And if our population grows between now and 2030, so it is not a point that stays the same. As the population grows, which it should by demographics, our goals would increase. So if we got up to 25% of our overall population being domestic people of color, then our goal would be 25%, both on students as well as on employees. So that's the success of the student. The employees being, again, that they should be reflective of the student population. Those numbers are about, last time we checked, domestic, this number is more challenging because we have not yet figured out how to break out international employees from domestic employees. And the last time we did it, we got the data from HR in the system. Our diverse employees, remember that now includes international, is around 13%. Remember, the goal is 20, so we're below there. But I will say faculty, again, not being able to distinguish between international and domestic, is actually higher. They're actually about 16% of our workforce, if you just factor in faculty, which means the other bargaining units are below 13, if they're 16, and they're the largest group of employees. So again, that's something we are looking at and having as a goal as we move forward, that number should be reflective of it. Remember I said we started this journey in 2017. I don't know why I want to keep saying 1917, but it's 2017 we started this journey. And it was a simple question that I asked of our institutional research area. Can you tell me the number of holes that our students of color have? And hole is what keeps a student from progressing, from registering, staying registered, a whole bunch of things. What we found from that data was that, have you heard of the phrase opportunity gap? Some people call it an achievement gap. I call it an opportunity gap. The system calls it an equity gap. And again, that's the difference between students being successful, majority students and domestic students of color, there's success rate here. What we saw, there were actually 3 gaps. There were 3 areas why students, all students, were not being successful here. One, academically, because they had different kind of holes that were keeping them from progressing. One, financially, another was a financial hole. Again, not allowing them to register. And the third was, the third gap, for a better term, is called what we call environmental. So those are the 3 reasons why any student stays or leaves. It's real simple. They stay because they're doing well academically. They stay because they can afford to be here. They're allowed to register and stay registered. And the third, they feel welcomed here. They enjoy being here. Doesn't matter, male, female, international, domestic. Those are the 3 categories that causes students to be successful. And that's what we found. Those were the 3 areas. And that's why our strategies all deal with all 3 of those areas. But do y'all know, just out of curiosity, what's the biggest area between those 3 areas, why we lose students or why students aren't progressing? All students, domestic students of color? Shout out. You want to? except people who know because they heard this speech before. It is financial. We lose students at 2 to 3 times the rate as for academic reasons. And so why it's important that we look at the student as a whole being, because we can have the best academic strategies to keep them here, but if we don't work in the other two, we still may lose them. So again, they're doing well, have a 4.0, but if they can't afford to be here, they may drop out, but they don't like being here, don't feel welcome, they may drop out. So we have a negative student success. Or they can, have the money to be here, they love being here, but they're not doing well academically, so we ask them to leave again. Or they're doing well academically, they can afford to be here, but they don't feel welcomed and they leave. So it's important that our initiatives around that deal with all 3 areas, because that's a whole being that we have to deal with. So you can't just fixate on one of those, you have to work on all 3 of those to keep that student here successfully. So when we started to look at the data, that's what we saw, why students were not being successful here. But what we also saw and discovered was that there wasn't just students of color in those groups. They were affecting students of all our students. We're having, again, students who had these different kind of holes in them. But what we did see is that students of color were disproportionately in those groups. So I'll give you an example. Financial. Say, remember I said they're about 18, 19% of the student population. They may be in there, 38% of them had holes on them. So they could not progress. So that's where the gap began to happen in. But we also found that obviously there were white people in there too, because that was the other 67% were also with those holes. So all the initiatives that we did and we continue to do were not geared just toward people of color. They were, we implemented tons of initiatives to affect overall student success. And we've seen that. But what it meant we had to do, we had to work doubly on the domestic people of color, because if that's going up, that means we got to keep working harder to have it reach, got to run almost twice as fast to catch up to something that's in front of you, so that they have a chance to close the gap. Because if overall student success is increasing, then domestic students' successes have to increase faster to finally catch up to them and do well here at the institution. I'm going to share with you. So I told you on Equity 2030 and that we started our journey earlier in the system. So we're about 3 years more advanced in the system on this data collecting, which is the other important note of Equity 2030 is something called equity by design. And that's a term that's out there. And that means we are just intentional about using data to inform our decisions and to assess what we do. Remember I said we went and looked at holes, that would be Equity 20. Why are students not being successful here? What are the different areas that they're not being successful? And that's using data. It isn't us guessing, because if we were guessing, we think the issue would just be academically. But because of data, we know that it is not just academically why students are successful, not being successful here or being successful here. It's also for financial reasons and also for environmental reasons. When we looked at the data through Equity 2030 lens, we also broke down the data even more. So by students, domestic students of color, first generation, Pell eligible. We also break it down by subgroups. So we have the data for Latinx students. We have it for African American students. We have it for Asian American and we have it for African Americans. So we break it down even more. And we break it down even more from that. Because what you need to have, the data tells you where you need to do your initiatives, because you don't want to spend money and put resources in somewhere you don't really need to do it. Or you don't want to, more importantly, not put it where you need to put it. For example, when we looked at the data, we know that students of color who were athletes, but no longer athletes, underperformed the gap. So that we needed to work with athletics on some initiatives there, and we have, to work with students before they leave athletics and lose eligibility to keep them enrolled and moving toward graduation. We also know that students from certain inner city high schools underperform the gap, even though they come here regular admit. And we have initiatives dealing with that. We even know what res halls, how students who live in res halls are doing here at the institution. All of that's important because that means we have to do strategies for all of them. We know that Stadium Heights pre-pandemic had about a 14% gap between itself and the next res hall in terms of success of students in res halls. So that required us to look at those why that was happening and then figure out initiatives that worked to that. One of the things we found out was Stadium Heights was one of those res halls which were the last to fill, because those were the people who were applying, getting accepted to the university later. And data shows that people who apply late, decide late, tend to have lower success rates. So these are all data points that we're looking at. We never, in the past, before really 1970, 2017, looked at those data points. We knew it was out there, but we never factor into any of our decision making and figuring out how all these different points affect the student. Now, so you can have a student who's a student athlete from an inner city high school in Stadium Heights. That student, and who needs money, that student's chance of being successful here is low. And those are the data points we look at and the crisis modes that we have to interact with students to figure out what we need to do to have them have the best chance to be successful here. Now, some of the things that we have initiated based on what we knew and what we saw from the data. Some of you, I think there's some student looking people here. Do any of you who are a student are using something called MathPass? We have two. That was an initiative that came out of DE&I based on something called high fail rate classes. And those were classes that disproportionately, the criteria we use to call something a high fail rate class is something where 25% or more of the students fail in that class 3 years in a row. So that's the definition that moves something into high fail rate class. So there's a whole bunch of those classes that have a high history of lots of students failing in it. And again, lots being 25. And remember, 25 is the minimum. It could be up to 40% of students on a regular basis fail these classes. And so one of the first initiatives was MathPass. How do we work with students to help them be more successful in those classes? And that MathPass is for everyone. Anyone benefits from MathPass. We do extra things again. And remember what I said, none of these initiatives were just for people of color. They were for all students, because we know when we looked at the data, it was not just people of color who were failing these classes at a high rate. It was all students that were not doing well in these classes. Again, students of color were disproportionately in that number, but it was all students that were not doing well. And so first initiative with that was Math Pass, and the data shows it's working. Students are getting better. More students are being successful. The gaps are closing on those classes that have Math Pass. And again, looking at data, we know the magical number for students to be successful is 10 times. Minimum of 10 times going to a math class opportunity out of 16, I guess, is what would be there. We know 10 is the magical number that requires a student to look at. The next thing we will begin to look at is, so we look at the students, but also what's happening, the interaction between the student and the faculty member in that class. Are there things that could be happening different and better? So some of the things, conversations that may be happening and have happened is what kind of pedagogy that the faculty members using. How is this, what they may be doing be causing some of the challenges in those classes. So it's looking at both ends of those equations, the students, as well as the way the class may be taught and learned. So that was one of those initiatives that happened. We said initiative with athletes and athletics. Rosalind's leading a initiative with those inner city high schools. So all the things that we're doing with students, at the end of the day, how do we have, oh, can't do that. It looks like it's in the fifth dimension here when you, I can't seem to get back to Zoom. Oh, okay. So that's equity twinning, that by 2030, that our student population enrollment will be minimally reflective of the state population, that the student success rate, there would be no gaps between majority students and minority students, students of color going to this institution. Doesn't mean everybody will have a 4.0 grade point average, but the success rate of everybody coming, graduating, and leaving here with some completion mechanism, certificate or a degree, will be comparable to each other. Any questions on the student side about equity 2030? And as I said, this is a system-wide initiative, something the university and the president is evaluated on yearly. And president has to explain why they're not moving in the right direction. If you remember, I said we have the advantage of it. We started early, so we are seeing pre-pandemic, our gaps went from about 10% to less than 4%. Our student population grew. The pandemic has caused challenges for everybody, including us here. We believe when we see the 30-day number for this at the end of this month, we will see that our students of color overall enrollment will drop. And we're expecting to see an increase in the gap. Not back to what it was, but higher than it was at the lowest point. Pre-pandemic, I was pushing the university to have a goal of 2025, that we would close all our gaps by 2025. And I thought we could have done that. The pre-pandemic, after, and we're still in the middle of it. And if you read everything, the pandemic disproportionately hit people of color, more challenges, both on environmental, financial, and all those other reasons. So we're recalibrating that. Hopefully we will see those numbers going back up. We do see now already that our enrollment, people applying of color, applying to MSU has gone up again. So we will know better at the end of the point through the next recruitment class. Are we back to where we were to get us to the 20%? Because we were only 1% down as we move forward on that. But any questions on the student side of it? Yes. You know, I think the biggest thing is everybody can do. Remember what I said, the third one is environmental. How do you make people feel welcome and want to stay here? Remember I said somebody can have a 4.0, can afford to go here without needing any financial aid, but just don't like it here. And they leave. Some of you students may know that. You may know some of the people, students who have left. And that's the big, how do we make this the place more inviting for everyone? Make this a place where people feel they can be successful at. I think that's one of the, how do you interact with somebody? I think, and this, let me be honest, this is a difficult time. What's happening in the nation is happening on campus. So we are becoming a very polarized nation. And so some of the behavior that's being acted out nationwide is also being acted out on campus. So, you know, be nice to each other. Doesn't mean you have to agree and like each other, but be nice to each other is the biggie. You know, as I said, there are other initiatives, but that's the one that everybody, how do you interact with somebody differently than yourself? How do you make them feel wanted, included, and they feel that they can be successful here? One of the things I just heard at the cabinet today, we have a weekly cabinet meeting with division heads and the president. Our numbers are inching up again. We're one of the few institutions who's doing well financially and whose enrollment has been fairly stable. St. Cloud has lost about half of its enrollment over the last 6 years. Ours has been fairly stable. Last time we count by head count, we were actually a little ahead of last year. And I think part of the reason we do well academically and financially is because we are doing things, making more people. Remember I said our student international population is growing, our domestic people of color, and those are the growth areas. Those are the growing areas of people out there in the world and in the United States and in Minnesota. The best businesses are the ones who figure out how to get to the growing markets and make them want to come here and make them want to stay here. One of the number that the VP of Finance and Administration always says, it's about 120 students to make $1 million. So if 120 students choose to stay, than we thought would stay, we have $1 million more in our budget. But if 120 students choose to leave because they're not happy, we don't let them back, a whole bunch of reasons, we just lost $1 million out of our budget between semesters. And I'll give you a point of reference. When I got here, again, 30 plus years ago, our budget, which is about $160 million, 70% of it was state allocation. So those are money that came from the state to us. 30% was tuition dollars. That has flipped. And it started to flip about 15 years ago, where it is now about our operating budget is about 70% tuition dollars and 30% state allocation. So it is much more important that we recruit students and retain them and graduate them, because that's the largest part of our budget now. We know, you know, these are technical words, you know, we're more state affiliated now, because the majority of our budget comes from other than state dollars. So those are the reasons why it's important that we do a better job of recruiting and retaining students. And we do a better job of recruiting and retaining the growing markets. At some point, somebody had to make a decision. Boy, is that those automobiles a thing of, just a funny thing that only a few people are going to own? We ought to keep putting more money into horses and buggies. The people that said the first were the people who became successful versus the people who fixated on horses and buggies. You didn't want to be the last one in that market because it means you probably were going bankrupt. And same way here, if you don't figure out how to recruit the growing markets, the chances of you being successful are minimal. And those are all things that we have been good at. And I think that has helped us weather these issues. The third one is on employees. How do we have our employees be reflective? How do we recruit them? How do we retain them? How do they be reflective of how employee success is a little different than student success. You got things you can measure. What's grade point average? How do they graduate? Employees are a little different, but some of them are the same. For example, the data we're looking at now, are employees of color, diverse employees, are they for the faculty, are they proportionally where they should be for full professors or associate professors or assistant professors? How are they doing on the tenure track? So those are numbers we look at now, to how we define employee success. That's on the faculty side. Other employees and MU staff or other, there are ranges in all of those areas. People that may be MU staff in here, there's range A, B, C, D, and F. Where are diverse people at in those ranges? How many do we have in the E range? And we have very few MU staff E range positions at the institution. I think 5, 6, 7. Not many. I think right now there are no people of color in the E range. Very few in the D range. Concentrated in this B and C range. So those are things we're looking at of how do we make sure that, again, that's equitable for all employees. The same way with ASCME and other bargaining units. There are in ASCME principals and seniors and intermediate. So there's ranges there too. Where again are domestic people of color? Are they based on their population a portion in those groups, in those numbers that they should be based on just their numbers in? So I think in ASCME, the clerical one, the highest is principal. Is that correct? Do we have any employees of color as principals? No, I know the answer. I'm just throwing it out there. But those are the things we're looking at as an institution and to show that we're an equitable society. Now, I had a conversation with the student government the other day when I was talking. While the system talks about equity 2030 being specific groups, we look at all of it. We started our journey earlier looking at all. So we look at where women are, whether they're women of color or not. We look at where they're at in the system, how they're represented. Same with the faculty, women or students who have accessibility needs. So while they're not in our overall Equity 2030 as a system, as a university, they're important to us. And we are looking at those data and figuring out how we can intervene in ways that make a difference. Because that's what's going to keep us relevant and as an institution, where all the different groups are going to want to come here because they know they have an equitable chance to be successful here. No one wants to work at a place where they don't have a chance to get promoted or get access to resources or have a chance to graduate. I tell my colleagues all the time, if I had children, I would not send them to a place where they did not have a chance of graduating in 4 years. I would find a place that would give them the best chance to graduate in 4 years and send them there, even though it might be a little more expensive. And so that's what I'm talking about, why it's important that we figure these things out, because it is to our economic and social responsibilities, these things out, because we will continue to won't be successful moving forward. So again, our employees are an important variable to recruitment. Employees are a little more difficult to change the dial because Students, we get about 25% new students every year. We get about maybe 5% new employees every year. So that's a harder number to move because we have smaller numbers of people coming in. People tend to come to Mankato and stay. Not unusual, that's across the nation. I like to say faculty tend to come someplace, and I say nest. What I mean by nest, they can promote, they can go from assistant to associate to full professor where they get hired at. So they don't need to go somewhere else. Administrators tend to move to other places to get a promotion. For example, our new president came from being a provost in California to become a president in Minnesota. That's the way administration tends to work. So that's the difference. So it's harder to get those things. There is only one director of a department, only 8 VPs, 7 VPs across the unit. So if you want to be a VP, and I haven't been a VP for 31 years, but I've been a senior cabinet level for 13 years. You know, somebody may have to wait a little longer for me to leave or for the president to decide they want somebody else new. Yes. Okay. Okay.
Okay, so our question is individual work such as self-inquiry and culturally responsive teaching practice is essential and important. Thoughts on how we are approaching the support of these individual practices with our university procedures, policies, and resources, so these individual efforts have broader, sustained, and aligned impact?
That is a great question. Because as I said a little earlier, that is something we are looking at as an institution. And as a matter of fact, the academic affairs hired an associate vice president. One of their jobs is equity initiatives in academic affairs, which is working with the faculty to make sure, again, that their class is being responsive to all the different kind of students with different kind of learning styles in there. So yes, how do we reward those people that are changing their classes to be more responsive to students? How do we give them the help to do that? These are all things that we are looking at as an institution and that we need to figure out. And we are still figuring out. I'm not saying we have all the answers, but we minimally know that we need to start asking the questions. That's at the core of the academic side of the issue. So that's the employee side. Third leg is how do we get people out there to get access to the millions of dollars that the system in Minnesota State Mankato allocates through contracts and agreements. That one is a little more challenging, as I said, because we don't even know the companies out there. Then how do we work with those companies so that they can navigate the system to get access to those contracts? Are there things we can do to help them do that? Are all things that we need to do differently. One of the things I will say, remember I said this is equity 2030. It is not equal 2030. It is equity 2030. And equity is a very important word, which means you put the resources where they need to go to fix a problem. Doesn't mean you just say, hey, well, everybody have access to this. And so we're going to still give resources all over the place, but we're not going to earmark it to where the problems are. X 2030 says we're going to put resources where the problems are. And I use this as a simple example of to show the difference. Everybody, you know, a lot of people have cars. People probably had flat tires. If you got a flat tire, you got to fix the flat tire to work again, right? You can work on the engine all you want, but you still got a flat tire. You still got a flat tire. So you got to put resources and energy into fixing the flat tire, not just working on the engine. And so that's what Equity 2030, you put resources where it needs to go. So I got a flat tire, I need to put resources to to fix that flat tire. I got an opportunity gap here, I put resources there to fix it. versus, well, I'm putting general money into the car, so maybe by osmosis, the flat tire will get fixed. Or people won't notice. Nope, don't work that way. So that means we're being intentional. Yes. Another question?
Yes, we did have another question. We were wondering, kind of related to that um, idea, how are, like you said, with coursework, there's data, and it's easily identified for support staff or support administrators who are not maybe quantified in a similar way. How might this occur within those roles? How might those roles contribute as well?
In the classroom?
Just across campus, kind of related to what you said about the environment. What are ways that we should be self-identifying our areas of improvement?
Again, we all these data points and challenges points are being shared with the vice presidents of those divisions. For example, remember I said environmental when we looked at data points and holes. We knew in that African-American male was 3 times more likely to have a disciplinary hole in their transcript than other groups. Guess what? We have conversations with the area of the university that puts disciplinary holes on people of what they need to do differently. Financially, again with vice president, why students were not being successful here. Remember I said that's the biggest reason why students aren't being successful here is financial reasons. Series of initiatives and looking at reviewing policies that we looked at to ensure that students had the opportunity that we changed policies. For example, one of the policies that we got changed was anybody lived in the res halls here at some point in time. There used to be a policy at the university that if you owed the university money, didn't pay off your bill by a certain time, we cut you off on the food plan if you were on the food plan. Boy, that's probably one of the worst things you do when you talk about food insecurity and housing and say you can't eat. And we're using food as a way to get people to compel. We changed that. Another one on financial was if you owed money to the university and you were sent to collections, you had to pay off your collections before you can come back. And you had to pay off the next semester in full. So not a lot of people with money to do both of those things. So we changed that where you no longer had to pay your next semester in full. We also allow people to carry more money over up to $750, and we're pushing it up to $1,000. We hope that you can stay registered and give you more time to pay your bill off. It used to be $100. One of the things we found in all of these conversations was, and that's the changing of a culture. It is to the university's advantage to keep students enrolled. It is harder to get a student who unenrolled to become re-enrolled than to keep them enrolled. So we had the old mentality, well, we'll stop them from enrolling. We'll use those things to compel them to do what we want. But some students just said, screw you, we're gonna leave. And who did we hurt ultimately? Us. When I went to school many decades ago, before a lot of you in this room were even born, it was all the students' fault why they were not successful. That's what the institution believes, faculty believe, employees believe. The students weren't successful because they were bad students. Nothing the university did to them. It was all, they just couldn't navigate the system. They were poor, whatever. We know that's not the case anymore. The university does things to cause students to be unsuccessful. Now, students do things also that they need to work on, but we need to get those things out of the way that we cause them not to re-register, not to have afford to do things that get in the way of them being able to register. One of the things we did that we're looking on now, we think we have an answer to it. If a student was suspended academically because they fell below certain thresholds, but they also were suspended from financial aid if they didn't complete at a 67% percentage. We let them back academically, but we didn't let them back financially. That's not a good combination because a lot of students here can't afford to go here unless they get financial aid. So we're working on that. So those are things where sometime the university was in conflict with each other. This office said this office said that, and they were in conflict with each other. So, one of the things I tell my staff all the time, and I would say to everybody working at the university, are you hearing consistent challenges? When students come to talk to you, are you hearing stuff? That's how we found out about Stadium Heights, because students were talking to staff, and we noticed, hey, these students all seem to be in Stadium Heights and they're having challenges. So when you talk to students, you talk to friends, you talk to students that come to your window, come to your office, and you're talking to groups of students, see if there's some common theme there, and then bring it to somebody's attention who might be able to make a difference. All these changes that we have made in policy are based on recommendations from staff. I don't have all the answers. I can guarantee the cabinet doesn't have all the answers. But in this university of learners, we got a lot of the right answers here. We just got to make sure the right people hear them to impact the changes that make a difference in students' life and employees' life and external people. Well, that's my talk. And if you send something to Elizabeth, I can send you these data points, these slides that work very well. Send it to you if you want to look at the data we're looking at. The only data you would not be able to look at, because there's questions of confidentiality as to those high fail rate, high gap classes. We can't show it that way. But a lot of the other data points are just, general information that allows it. But go to your office, see how you interact with students. See what you're doing can make a difference to keep a student here, or help recruit a student first, then help them keep them here and help them graduate. A motto we have in DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, two of them really, it takes a university to close the opportunity gap, because remember what I said, is not one reason why a student isn't successful. So it takes lots of offices to do it, lots of people. And then one student at a time, one semester at a time. How do we keep that student who's in front of us, who has a challenge, how do we keep them in school that semester? To get them to the next semester. And if they got a challenge next semester, how do we keep them in that semester moving forward? So when they look up 4 years from now, and I will always push 4 years, they're walking across the stage and graduating. So that's the biggie. Sometimes people think too far. Nah, how do you keep John or Jane just there this fall semester? Keep them from dropping out, get them to the spring semester. And that's a success. We get enough of those, because you can't graduate more students unless you retain more students. Simple math there. So any last questions I might be able to answer for you? Give to Elizabeth again if you want information on some of the data we're looking at, and I will get it to her to share. In the back.
Like a day for prospective high school students.
Yeah. D&I functions as a complementary division to all the other divisions. So we work with academic affairs. We work with finance and administration. We work with student affairs, which include admissions, undergraduate and graduate. So yeah, we visit high schools. We have campus visit days where we work with admissions and other departments to bring students to campus. Before the pandemic, we were bringing about 2,500 diverse students to campus a year. Other questions? Thank you. I hope this was give you a general understanding of Equity 2030. And it is a growing and evolving initiative. I hope it is, because we were finding new things about it, what we need to do differently. So what we knew 5 years ago, which has got us to this point, we're learning new things because of the pandemic. How we need to respond in a pandemic environment and still have all students be successful, but in this case, domestic students of diverse students to be successful here. Thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to me.
Thank you so much, VP Morris, for joining us today. And thanks to all of you who took some time out. The Diversity Institute has several more events coming up this semester. We'll be sharing the October schedule. It's on your table. Feel free to take the schedule with you. For those of you who are virtual, we will get that emailed out to you at the conclusion of the event. But please do stay engaged with us. There will be LinkedIn badges available for folks who participate in 4 or more sessions a semester. So you'll be able to get those at the end of the semester, but thank you again. Put it on your resume, put it on you get a certificate of completion as well at the conclusion. So thank you all so much. Stay in touch with us. Feel free to email me. It's also diversityinstitute@mnsu.edu is the email between me and Samuel. You should be able to get a hold of one of us. So thank you so much.